We are one of 14 local drug task forces that were set up in 1997 to respond to drug problems that were emerging and were quite serious in a number of local areas, particularly a response to the use of heroin, opiates. Our work would involve working across a number of different pillars that are aligned with the National Drug Strategy. So that would be providing services for education and prevention, justice and supply, and for treatment and rehabilitation. Part of that as well is completing research so that we know the needs of the local community and we can try and respond to the needs of the local community in a timely manner. We would provide funding to a number of local drug and alcohol treatment services and we would also run a number of services ourselves. For example, the Strengthening Families programme, we would operate in the local area for families that are experiencing issues within the home. Thanks.
Oh, okay. Could you just tell us about your recent research there? I read an article in the Branch Gazette last week and an article in Northside People. When did this report come out? Last few weeks, I think, wasn't it? And could you just tell us about it, please?
Yeah, absolutely. It was launched recently and the research was completed last year. It basically was so that we could collect up-to-date information about drug use in Dublin 15 by both young people and adults and people who are in treatment and who weren't in treatment. The reason we did this was because we didn't have this information. It's not available through any other source, and we wanted the current information so we could know what the needs of the community are, and then, as I said previously, we can then work towards responding to the community needs. It was a massive piece of research that was undertaken, and it's not a standalone piece. It's going to be completed every year. So it's a monitoring system, so we can monitor what's going on in the community and always have that relevant current information. The demographics we currently have are based on the 2011 census. There's 101,000 people living in the area. 26% are aged under 15, 18% are in the most deprived social class, 37% are early school leavers, and depending on what community you're talking about, between 18 and 25% of people are unemployed. So what we can see from the demographics, without even doing any research, is that it's quite a deprived area. And there would be a number of risk factors for drug use, namely belonging to a deprived social class, leaving school early, or being unemployed.
Could you just talk a bit about the actual drug use in Dublin 15? There's a couple of statistics you just gave me there that sound very startling. Unemployment in particular, like is it that high in middle class areas as well? Is it?
Well, I suppose Castleknock would be one of the affluent areas in the local community, and that certainly wouldn't have the same percentage of unemployed people. It would be between 6 and 7%, which would be just below the national average.
Okay, that's fine. I was wondering about that. Okay, could you just tell us about your findings of the report, please?
Sure, totally. To give you some stats. So, between May 2014 and May 2015, there was 650 people treated for drug or alcohol use in local treatment centres. 95% were Irish. 8% were under the age of 18, and the majority of those in treatment were aged between 35 and 44, and that was 44% of those in treatment. Will I tell you a bit about the types of drugs?
Yeah.
Great. So the heroin was the main problem drug for 46% of people in treatment, and the majority of these people were aged between 35 and 44. This is showing us a trend that we know nationally and internationally is also being seen on a national basis. Basically, the heroin users presenting to treatment services are an older population of long-term users. There's very few young people presenting to services, and indeed there was no under 18-year-olds in treatment for heroin use.
That's probably a good sign. It's shown maybe that the education is getting through about heroin. Do you think so?
Absolutely. What the research found as well, that young people have seen family members go through heroin addictions, and because of that, they have not gone down that road. However, the under 18-year-olds in treatment are in treatment for cannabis, which is presenting a problem to them for a number of reasons. The perception from the young people was that it's a harm-free drug, and there's no risks associated with using it. Some young people, their peer groups were using it as well, and it has become normalised. Young people were also in treatment for the use of alcohol as well. So cannabis and alcohol were the main problem drugs for young people in Dublin 15.
Yeah, I have a particular interest in alcohol abuse. I've covered it several times on radio over the last couple of years. Sure. I also have an interest though in illegal drug use. I did illegal drugs for a few years when I was a teenager. I smoked cannabis, not very regularly, but fairly often, or often enough, for 3 or 4 years between the age of 15 to 19. And I did ecstasy tablets most weekends for a year. I also tried another couple of drugs, but cannabis and ecstasy were my main legal drugs, along with alcohol and cigarettes being my main legal drugs. There are a couple of perceptions about drug use in Ireland that I'd like to talk to you a bit about. I'm saying this as someone who's experienced of doing these drugs. The first is about peer pressure. When I was a teenager, I was aware of the point of view that health professionals and teachers and parents, a lot of parents advocated about drugs, saying that peer pressure bears a large brunt on people to do drugs, you know. Sure. But I never personally thought that applied to me, though, because I was never consciously pressurised to do drugs. I first smoked hash or cannabis when I was 13, and I smoked it a bit on the weekends for a couple of years with a couple of older friends for 2 years without thinking much about it. It was only when I was 15 that I started smoking more often. Just to make it clear, like, I used to think that when people talk about peer pressure, they meant people consciously putting pressure on you. But it's just the influence your friends have on you. I think that's the peer pressure. They don't put conscious pressure on you. And just to explain it quickly, I'll give you a better example. When I started to do ecstasy tablets, I was aware that ecstasy tablets are dangerous drugs. I heard loads of stories about them. And then when I finished school when I was 18, after a few months, a best friend of mine who was friends with he was fairly studious in school, you know, and he was in college then. And he started doing them, and I was shocked that he started doing them. And I said to myself, like if he's doing them, why have I do them? Because he was always fairly studious, and always on a straight and narrow. And I felt like if he can do them, I can do them. You know what I mean? So peer pressure is real, isn't it?
Sure.
It's just like, I don't know about a lot of other people, but the perception I had of it was different than what it probably is in most cases. Do you agree?
Sure, absolutely. In relation to the research, in relation to drug use amongst young people, there certainly did seem to be an awful lot of drug use going on. When I say drug use, I mean alcohol as well, and prescribed drugs. Like binge drinking to excess was a common occurrence, particularly at the weekends. The use of other drugs at the weekend was also reported, like cocaine powder, ecstasy has become increasingly popular over the last while. Ketamine has also become quite popular, and there were reports that some young people, and indeed some adults, would use these drugs together at the weekend, and after a drug binge would use the likes of cannabis or benzodiazepines or Z drugs to help bring them down from the high associated with the use of drugs. Yeah, so it really, for those people, that their perception on drug use was party time with friends at the weekend. In relation to the influence of other people, what came out in the research, and again, this is nothing new, what came out in the research was that drug and alcohol use within the home, within the family setting, influences young people's drug and or alcohol use. Parents may have a drug or alcohol problem, and in turn what happens, the drug use becomes normalised within the family home, and in some circumstances those young people end up using drugs and alcohol in a problematic way as well.
Yeah, in my case, I was 13, as I said, when I first tried it, and I hung around with a couple of fellas who were 15, and when you're at that age, a year or two gap between the ages, like, it's a big difference in kind of maturity.
Sure.
So that's why I think I was led down the wrong road. I don't blame them, totally. The other thing I'll say about the perception of drug abuse, I just want to talk about the perception, is the argument that people do them for escapism. I have a bit to say about that. Do you want to say anything about that before I say it?
Yeah, I suppose there's many factors as to why people use drugs, and there's individual ones which, like you said, escapism, boredom, and then there's the peer influence, as we were saying, there's the family influence, and then there's other, another individual factor would be that someone has experienced a traumatic event, be it in childhood or whenever, and that's what propels people into trying using drugs and then continuing to use them.
I was aware of a lot of the arguments against drugs when I was a teenager, but I still did them. Like, because I thought some of the arguments didn't apply to me, like peer pressure, but looking back on it now, I can see I think it did. And escapism, like I didn't do drugs to escape from my emotions or anything. Like, I wasn't a troubled youngster or anything, but just like I wasn't really big into sports, you know what I mean? So on the weekends there was a kind of vacuum there, and for a while I went to the cinema for a year or two, I suppose. But when I was about 16, I started to do them more. But I did smoke hash more. I left school when I was 18, and didn't go to college for 2 years later. Between the age of 18 and 19, I partied on the weekends, drinking alcohol, smoking hash and doing ecstasy, and I also had a few beers sometimes during the week as well. I was working in a couple of different jobs at the time. When I was 19, just gone 19, all the drug use, both legal and illegal, caught up with me, and I spent the next year recovering, you know. And I was out of work. I have to say that the year between the age of 19 and 20, the year of my recovery, was the longest year of my life to date, and I don't think I'll ever come across anything like it again unless I do illegal drugs again. I was going to a counsellor and I was reading, the good things though, I was going to a counsellor and reading the self-help books, and I got into Reiki, but the year still dragged on. Like, it was the longest year of my life. But the point I'm trying to make is that, like, a lot of people get into drugs, like, they don't do drugs when they're in secondary school, but they do them when they're in college. And the point I'm trying to make is, I've seen this with other people and myself as well, like, is that a gap year out of college or work can be awful for a lot of people. And I just want to get the point across to any younger people maybe in college and thinking about taking the year out, you know. Like, a lot of people it's probably grand, but other people, they could easily slip into drug use, you know what I mean?
The majority of the people that we surveyed, the majority of the 650 people who are in treatment were actually polydrug users. So
What's that mean, yeah?
It means the use of two or more drugs at any one time. And this was true for the under 18-year-olds and the majority of the adults as well. There were a number of differences in the types of drugs used by both the under 18-year-olds and the adults, with the young people not using drugs such as heroin, methadone or crack cocaine. The most common type of polydrug use for the under 18s was alcohol and cannabis. But they also did use ecstasy and cocaine powder together as well. Indeed, alcohol was an integral part of young persons' polydrug use, and that was not the case for the majority of the adults. I'll just talk you through some of the changes as well that we found.
Yeah, and just a quick question. The results of your report that you issued, are the same kind of results coming out in other areas that there are drugs task forces?
Okay, we are the only local drug and alcohol task force that has completed this research. As I was saying to you a little while ago, one of the aims of the research was to identify any new trends in drug or alcohol use in the community, and we did identify a number. What we found was that there was an increase in the use of cannabis, crack cocaine, alcohol, and codeine-based over-the-counter drugs such as sulfidine. Also an increase in the use of the sleeping tablets, the benzodiazepines and Z drugs. We wanted to find out about how easy it was to access drugs and alcohol in the local area. What we found, all participants, and the participants were drug users, their family members, and also people who work with drug users in the community. What everyone told us was that it was very, very easy to get drugs and alcohol in the local area. To tell you a tiny bit more about that, the main method was through local dealers, followed by the internet. We found that some young people used Facebook to buy and sell drugs. In relation to alcohol, what we found was that low-cost alcohol is available locally in some venues and in some supermarkets, and this was increasing the use of this drug. Also, some young people and adults were switching from drinking beer to drinking spirits because they were cheaper in these local outlets.
Spirits are the most damaging, aren't they? Yes, particularly vodka, I heard. I was never big into vodka, but
Absolutely, spirits would be a lot more damaging. There's a higher percentage of alcohol in spirits compared with beer. You're looking at 5% in beer, and it could be anything up to 40%, if not more, in spirits.
Just to say about cannabis and ecstasy and alcohol, like I think they're deceptive drugs because they're relatively cheap and easily available. But they're deceptive because they're cheap, but they do so much damage, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. Indeed, we found that some young people chose to do ecstasy because the tablets could cost €5 or they could cost €3, and that they may choose to do that rather than drink because it's a cheaper option. In relation to cannabis, it is pricier. In relation to cannabis, what we found was that a couple of grams is €50, which is a substantial amount of money. What we found in the local area, young people and adults don't even need money to buy the drug. Dealers are letting people buy the drugs on tick. So they're getting the drugs and using the drugs before paying. What's happening for some people is that they're not repaying the drug debt and they're going back to get more drugs, and hence drug debt escalates, which is leading to intimidation of various different sorts in the local community. Indeed, we found there was an increase of drug debt intimidation amongst young people and adults in the local area, and it would be for predominantly cannabis, but also for cocaine or other drugs as well.
Yeah, and of course, a lot of the drug dealers, well, particularly at the top drug dealers are extremely dangerous people. Like, I think there's a perception as well, I know some older people than me have it, that all drug dealers are bad people. But I found when I knew drug dealers, and most of them ones I knew were kind of low-level drug dealers, but a lot of them are okay. They're okay people. Like,
for anyone out there listening who is living in Dublin 15 and may want some information around drug or alcohol use, or indeed how to access services, our phone number is 824 9590.
yeah, and it's certainly a way people can contribute to the research. Like I was on Twitter there the other day, and I saw one of the local county councillors posted up. He was in Millennium Park and he saw some illegal drugs packaging, and he said he was going to ring yourselves, the taskforce. So
Okay.
are you open to that, people contributing if we come across any instances around it?
Absolutely. That was a big part of the research. We were out in the community for 4 months and we collected drug litter to try and find the places within the local communities that support drug use. So it could be in a secluded area in a park or in a housing estate. We found a number of these secluded spots that were regularly used for drug and alcohol use. We know that because every time the spots were visited, there was fresh drug litter. So absolutely, I'd be more than happy to receive drug litter. So our drug litter research is about to kick off again in the next couple of weeks, and this year what we're going to do, we're going to actually collect any prescribed medication packets that we find in the local area. The aim of this is to try and trace the origin. So was that medication actually prescribed, or was it bought over the internet and imported into Ireland? We think that's a very important piece of work to do.
Yeah, so as that county councillor was saying on Twitter there a few days ago, as he was doing rather, if people want to contact you to contribute to your work, and people are able to donate to you as well, right? And you accept donations, or you're not, I suppose, a charity? No. Mm. Okay, John, thanks very much. I'll be talking to you maybe next year when you launch your next report, or if you have any other major news in the meantime, I'll talk to you then. So, John, thanks very much. Right?
Darren, thanks very much. I really appreciate it.